Shyam, the founder of GoFloaters, yet again. And this time I have a special guest, Jeff Frick, along with me. And there's a lot to be told about him, his entrepreneurship career, and specifically in the last 8 years, he's been dwelling his time on talking to leaders from across the globe, uh, uh, top thinkers of the world in various topics, right? And one of his pet peeve and pet topics is future of work, and that's what we're going to pick his brains on today. And lot of fun, lot of forward thinking, future thinking that we're going to do in this call. We're going to make Jeff. I think you've got 5 predictions lined up for all of us. So you're going to also make some predictions on what we should see in 2024 and beyond. I'm really looking forward to that. And Jeff, thank you once again. It's been a pleasure getting to know you, getting to know your body of work. Humbled by what you've been able to do, and super grateful that we're able to host you on our podcast series. And yeah, it's like how do we say, coming of age moment for me to have you on the other side of the conversation. So thank you for being here, and I'd love you to open it up with a brief intro of yours, and specifically around future of work. What's gotten into you into this, and what's been your revelations there?
Well, Sean, thank you for that introduction. It's super nice. I'm very happy to be here. I've watched a number of the shows. I know a couple of the guests that you've had in the past, so thanks for having me. In the context of future of work, really, right? It was COVID, and it was kind of an emergency situation at the beginning, trying to figure out what do we do, and really, we could lean on a class of companies and individuals,
Right.
featuring mainly Darren Murph at the top of the list, I think, who had already been fully remote. So companies like GitLab, companies like Atlassian,
Yeah.
and one of the things I learned from Darren is all remote forces companies to be good at things that all companies should be good at. So
Mm.
that gets down to communication, clear communication of objectives. Um, Clear communication of task, connection to mission. So really, at that point, I started spending a lot more time with Darren. Also, I got Martin Mikos on, who's now the head of HackerOne, but he used to be at MySQL way back in the day, and they were fully remote, even though they lived in the same city.
Right.
So really started to go and get the best practices. And then once we started to come out of COVID, then I started my new career at Menlo Creek. It's a new beginning for a lot of us, and started the show Work 20XX as part of actually a WebEx project for thought leadership, to have an interview show to go out and talk to the smartest people out there that have been living it. Thankfully, a lot of the companies involved too are involved in research.
Mhm.
So there's a lot of research out there that you can leverage. There's also a lot of open source ethos within the community. So all this stuff is published in terms of best practices around meetings and best practices around communications and communication protocols and stuff. So it's been really a fun adventure. Kind of getting deeper into the topic by talking to smart people, which it's a cheat. I just like to get smart people to tell me things, and it's been a real treat.
So you can see that I'm kind of also following the same cheat code that you have. So I think that's the best way to learn, right? Isn't it?
Right.
Uh, you don't have to always make the mistakes yourself. You can
Right.
always.
And what else is fun is when you're doing your homework, you get exposed to all these other people. And that's, a big part of this is async and flexibility, and async really enabling people to do stuff when it works best for them, whether that's work or consuming media for entertainment. And so, getting into the libraries of all these different guests that I've had and where they've appeared and learning new shows, you really just go on this path of adventure, this path of learning that makes it kind of fun and actually not that hard. You just have to put in the time and do some of the research.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's so constantly evolving, right? You've got to be on top of it. You can't be like what yesterday is stale already, right? So yeah, I think that's doing that research. I think great, right? And again, I've seen since you mentioned COVID as a trigger for we get into this, right? What I've like this saying that's there, saying that future is already here. It's just that it's unevenly distributed, right?
Right. Great
What
line.
COVID did was to evenly distribute that future for all of us, right? Telecommuting, I mean, we had early experiments done by IBM and way back in 1980, and even before that, right? but it was so unevenly distributed that it was not considered to be mainstream, right? And now
Right.
it's evenly distributed, so it's everybody's future, not just the ones that have privilege to have that.
Right. Well, it's interesting, I had Kate Lister on and she talked about, telecommuting back in the day. And actually there's old laws on the books from the early 2000s that the US government is supposed to have their people work as much from home as possible for safety and continuity and in case there's some kind of global emergency like a pandemic. So it is interesting that it's been around a long time. And then as the digital tools have been here for a long time as well. We use them in a lot of our lives. So why don't we use them more at work? And I think, as you said, COVID just kind of ripped the band-aid off in terms of the excuses as to why we couldn't do it. And the fact that people were able to do it on a really short notice with no pre-planning. Thankfully, we live in an age of digital tools and digital connectivity that made it a lot easier. But,
Right.
a recurring theme over and over is digital really didn't change a lot. It just accelerated a lot of the things that were already in place. And digital work is one of them. I mean, when's the last time anyone did email between 9 a.m. and 5? I don't even know what the whole 9 to 5 conversation is. I haven't had a 9 to 5 job since I don't remember. So I think it's kind of, we've been working on the weekends. Nobody complained then. So I don't know what the big deal is.
Yeah, and this one podcast, right? I'm exactly 5 p.m. here, but you are at 5 a.m. on the other side. So
Right.
we're getting exciting work done. Right, the time boundaries are just even eroding away faster than we think. So now, so the another point that I want to kind of pick up, Jeff, is like this future of work um, was coined way back, right? So and like with the many things, there have been cycles that we've spoken about future of work, and specifically when the world turned into this new millennium, right? There was a lot of talk about future of work and all that, right? But so I want to, I mean, I know the answer. I'm sure you know the answer, but for a lot of the people who are have tuned in or who see this later, why are we talking about future of work all over again now, and with a renewed amount of energy, right? Why now? What's the trigger point for a lot of the companies to start talking about future of work and and then future of workplace, future of work, future of living, right? People are trying to create a dance between all these things. Why now? What's so important about the time that we live in
Right.
today?
Well, it's funny. Why now? Just because the future spins, right? The globe spins in one direction. We're not going back to 2018 or 2017. The interesting catalysts are these constant, at least here, every August, the return to office mandates that come up, at the end of every school year. I think, as Brian Elliott would say from Future Form, I think we've up to version 5.0 of the return to office. So there's this struggle for people to try to go back to the way that things were. And so I think it's important that we see that's not happening. But the more importantly is the really senior leaders. Most of them didn't work in this world. They didn't train in this world. They didn't grow up in this world, and so they actually do need a lot of training. And I think one of the things that COVID really exposed was bad management practices. Bad
Mm.
management practices. I don't know what you're doing. I don't know what you're working on. I haven't connected what you're working on to the larger mission of the company. I haven't spent enough time getting to know you as an individual so I know what makes you tick and what doesn't make you tick. And so
Mhm.
that's why I think it's really interesting that you go to a company like Atlassian or GitLab that's distributed and has all the documented ways of work, documented communication protocols. I think all of those things are so basic that we can all do a better job. I mean, the classic one is communication protocols, right? I mean, how many different ways can we instant message, right? We can do it on the phone, we could do it in LinkedIn, we could do it in any number of 1,000 apps. Well, what are the protocols? When should you use instant messaging? When should you not? What's the expected return? What about weekends? What about scheduled send? I think there's so many, little details in terms of behavior changes that can make this new way to work happen. Obviously, we talked about async a little bit. That's the huge unlock.
Right.
Flexibility is the huge unlock, not in place, but in how and time and when. And really, there is an opportunity to do things better. The office was built from an age when we actually did take paper and we did something to it from the inbox and we stuck it in the outbox. So, that predates all the electronic tools, that predates digital workplaces, that predates email and all these other tools. So it's interesting that it's taking so long to kind of give up some of those old ways. to do it in a better way, and actually the way we've always been doing it. I mean, if you're in sales, there's a ton of jobs that have been,
Yeah.
remote for a while. Get out of the office and get your butt down to the customers. That's
In
what
fact,
I used to get told.
the metric for a sales team has always been how much time you spend outside the office, right? So it's never
Right,
been, so it's always been that way. And again, I have this theory, right? The office, the reason why a lot of people are not able to get let go of the offices, and probably it tallies back to the point you made, is that not only the change management is obviously is one big hurdle that many leaders are not able to go through, but it also offers in a way probably rubbed in all the inefficiencies of the process, a lot of uh, uh, training that they don't do, right? So if somebody had to work not under my eyesight or not directly under my nose, right? I could afford to teach them along the way, right? Or correct them along the way, right? You didn't invest on a few things, process wise, training wise. So office in a way had a masking effect on a lot of inefficiencies and process gaps, documentation gaps, a lot of that, right? And when you take that away, you almost become naked in front of your team, right? And then you become, all of this gets exposed, right? You like,
right.
and that's more scary to people, right? To live in the open, to live in a transparent uh, way, right? I think that's another reason why you see a lot of resistance coming still from leaders after practicing it for 2 years, 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think you're right, and the transparency is a big piece. I mean, if I'm managing just by whether you're there or not, or whether you like to get me coffee, or when I when I was coming up, be the first person in the office and the last person to leave. Always get there before your boss. Always leave after your boss. That's just we're doing email and stuff. We're working all the time. We're working whenever the work comes in or whenever the work has to get done. So I think it's an issue. I think you're right, though. I don't think managers had thought through the objectives to really be able to measure output. And it was easier just to measure whether I see the back of your head over at your cube. But you've worked at big companies and small companies. Companies have been distributed forever. I mean, Kate Lister loves to say, right? Nine floors, nine states, or nine time zones. Big companies have been distributed forever. So even if you're in the same building, you might not be on the same floor. Or if you go to any big campus, there might be a big campus with lots of buildings. It's funny. There's kind of this tweener that nobody talks about, which Google and some of the tech companies did, where the office almost became home. It almost became your corporate place to live, because they had dry cleaning, they have all the food, they got oil changes for your car. I was almost wondering before COVID was going to swing the other way. We're like back to corporate housing, because it's most of your needs were taken care of. So if you're a 20 something fresh out of college, never learned how to cook, you didn't have to learn, because everything was taken care of you, down at the mothership.
No, I actually lived that life for 3 months. My first job, right? You kind of yeah, it was like the Matrix, right? You would get shipped from the corporate housing to the office and back, and yeah. So now coming to the few things that we want to kind of uncover, right? Two specific. We've spoken broadly about remote and flex, but I want to kind of take a little bit further, right? So and again, I will ask you for three, but then we'll keep the conversations around those few points, right? What are the three or a handful of macro trends that are already shaping the future of work, or have a huge potential to shape the future of work, right? And again, you can definitely mix in the workplace, because still it's difficult to kind of wean away workplace from work for a lot of us, right? So you somehow interlink them. What would be those macro trends that you kind of see today? And you have the worldview of talking to all these leaders, and you're seeing companies transition from one state to another state, right? So what would be those top three, the ABCs of the future of work in your mind be as of Jan 24th,
Right.
24?
So I saw a great talk by Pierre Nunterum, who used to be the CEO of Accenture years ago. Unfortunately, he passed away
Okay.
relatively early, and he was giving a great talk at his old business school. He said, the trend that trumps all other trends is demographics. Everything else falls from demographics, and trends change slow over time. Right. This is a slow moving train, and so what we've really seen is kind of it's going to be a talent shortage and an ongoing talent shortage, I think, in the best talent, just as populations are starting to not grow so fast and there just aren't as many people. China, I think, has had their population go down twice the last like 2 years in a row, which who would have ever thought? So I think that the competition for talent will continue to rage, and I think it's a little bit hidden now because of the layoffs that we're seeing that
Right.
continue. But I think that was more of an overhiring based on free money in another time. So I think that the competition for talent is going to be huge, which then begs that, can you get the most out of the people you have in the building? Can you retain the people that you have in the building? And can you now expand your talent TAM beyond the pools of talent that maybe that you used to go after before? And I think that's a really key piece to the whole thing. I
Right.
think another thing that's going to eventually happen is going to be on the finance side. And you kind of see it now with some of the large banks and the people that both finance large office buildings as well as inhabit large office buildings. And on one hand, they're saying back to the office, a lot of them. At the same time, they're saying they're going to reduce their own real estate footprint by 40%.
Hmm.
So where does that jive? And I think what's going to happen is, as younger companies grow and take on incumbents, and they've always had kind of a remote first attitude, and they don't have that line item in their balance sheet for real estate or their income statement, ultimately I think the finance world is going to say and challenge that spend on real estate, and it's going to have to be defended. So I think we're going to see more and more of that begin to happen. And then the last thing is the thing that we've lived in, and I know you've been in the industry a long time as well, which is the exponential curves of technology change.
Right.
And as disruptive as ChatGPT was, what, 14 months ago, I hate to even imagine what the computing horsepower delta has been even in the last year. And
Mhm.
so the pace of change is going to continue to accelerate. We have to stay as lifelong learners. You have to be comfortable being uncomfortable and adopting new things, because they're just going to keep coming. There's no static here. There's no status. We live in a dynamic world, and the dynamicism is the only thing that's a steady that we have out there. So I don't think those are going to change anytime soon.
No, absolutely. So I think those are three very huge macro trends. As like I think demographics is something that, in fact, I had not thought much about it, right? And then the moment you brought it up, it kind of makes sense, right? It's the biggest. It's a trend that affects the other trends, right? So a lot
Right.
of, I mean, industrialization, everything has happened around. And again, India, for example, it's the opposite, right? You've got a much younger audience to appeal to, right? So the kind of work, the technology is all you've got appeal to where your workforce is coming from, where your consumers are coming from as well, right? So it's
Right.
not just on the supply of labor, but it's also who are your consumers of products and services that you create, right? Is it the older population? Is it the younger population? Who are you doing this for, right? And in fact, quite coincidentally, the company that I used to work with, they had a very interesting jargon to describe future of work, right? The Sunday night, Monday night phenomenon, right? Uh, till Sunday night, you're partying, you're on the phone, you're WhatsApping your friends, you're on Instagram, you do this, and then Monday morning you come to the office, you look at a green screen, you look at antiquated systems, you look at the push button phone systems on your desk, and that's the gap of technology that used to exist and continues to
Right.
exist in many offices, right? But I think in a way, uh, the flex. So let's take one by one, right? And I don't want to delve on one macro trend per se, right? So now let's take it in the reverse order. Let's talk about technology as the first macro trend and macro driver, right? I mean, I'm picking that up because that's close to my heart. So I want to
Sure.
hear more on that from you, right? So, and again, here again, the statement that I made upfront kind of applies, right? So AI was there long ago as well, right? But now AI is in everybody's hand now, right? So it's like mobile phones, right? So everybody's got a smartphone in their hand. So the potential of what they can do with it is just enormous, right? And even in my own walk of my business, I think we have applied AI to every aspect of from sales to content production to marketing to right copywriting. So we are using AI almost like internet nowadays, right? So anyway, so now talking about technology and the technology curve, the new orbit that we are in with AI, right? How is that going to shape the future of work, right? Again, quick question, right? would managers lose their jobs? Would
Yeah.
leave?
Well, we think of all the technology we've incorporated into the office over the last, hundreds of years. Lots and lots of new technology. So there will always be jobs do, but the jobs will be different. I mean, my favorite line of this era is that your job's not going to be taken away by a computer, but it is going to be taken away by somebody using a computer. So if you're not finding ways to integrate these tools into your workflow and learn how to use them, both to be more productive, but also just to better understand what's real and what's not real. And you'll find that, there's a lot of the hype today is not necessarily real today. So, they're still a little bit cumbersome. That said, it's only going to get better tomorrow. And it seems like in this industry, we're always in the first inning of something new. We never seem to get to like the third inning and the next wave comes and comes and comes. So I think it's critically important to use these tools and find out where they can help you in your current workflow. Now, I do think tomorrow, whatever tomorrow is, they're going to get a whole lot better. And I think there are going to be some really interesting challenges around deep fakes and authenticity and source and a lot of stuff. At the same time, what we found over time is that the benefits of bringing more power to more people generally result in better outcomes and better economic activity. And so I think, now that we have access, not only do we have access to a supercomputer in the palm of our hand via our phone, but we don't have to write code to access it.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
So that's the other thing. I don't think enough is being said about advances in the human interaction with machines via natural voice, which is not an easy problem to solve with context and a whole bunch of things. So I think that's even more crazy that you've got this crazy assistant that you can talk to that can help you on the fly. So I think the most important thing is just get comfortable with the tools and start to try to learn where they're going to fit and presume they're going to get a lot better regardless of how you think that they are today on the generative AI side. It's going to get better and faster and smarter.
Right.
I
And I
think of
think,
like RPA. Right? What was RPA? Wasn't RPA supposed to be my little robot assistant? That was all the rage a couple years ago, robotic process automation. So these things keep coming and then something comes quickly behind them. So you got to stay comfortable with learning new stuff.
absolutely, absolutely right. So, and again, I want to kind of make this very, very relevant to startups such as myself, right? So, let's say I'm a founder of a startup that's let's say we are a 200 employee company or a 50 employee company, right? So, why you did mention the broad thing being that I need to ride the wave, right? I might not create a wave. I need to be ready to ride whatever wave is coming at me. But are there examples that you could take of companies that you've come in touch with, or leaders that you've come in touch with, as to how they are riding the wave? So what could we learn from them, right? So what are the kind of companies? What are they doing with AI specifically, right? So some have you come across any interesting application of the technology that you've made you sit and kind of take a pause to absorb what's happening?
I keep trying to understand it and just get it to do tasks that I've been wanting to have a computer do forever since the day I bought a HP scanner for $1,000 with it with some cheap OCR software to try to read documents and get them into my computer. Um, a lot. I'm not seeing a lot. I mean, some of the ones you may have seen that you hear about are, write me a business plan, write me a marketing plan. So, anytime there's a corpus of information that you can go and get something and not start from zero seems to be a really great application. I use it for a lot of tedious stuff, removing page breaks, removing spaces, really working with text, summarizing text.
Mhm.
So I haven't heard of any really kind of crazy breakthrough applications. I think there's probably some of that happening inside firewalls where there's data sets that aren't necessarily that we're seeing or that we're querying. But
Right.
it's still, to me, it's still a little kludgy and it's still a little summary. You can kind of recognize the text today just because of it's so grammatically correct. um, and so I think it still feels like a computer, but I think that's going to change. I mean, again, I think where it is today versus where it's going to be tomorrow is a radically different place. So I don't have any great examples. We just keep hearing about the potentials, but I haven't really seen anything earth shattering beyond, give me a plan, give me, evaluate this plan, kind of help you jump step a few steps in your process. Did we lose Sham? Did we lose the connectivity? Maybe I lost the connectivity. Fun of live. There he is.
Yeah. I'm
I
sorry.
mean, it's magic, right? You're in India. I'm in California. We're conversing across the Pacific Ocean, and it's going out to the rest of the world in almost real time. I mean, it's crazy the world we live in.
Absolutely, absolutely right. Sorry, I suddenly my Mac wanted to throw some tantrums. It said your mic is not working, so I had to refresh the screen. So
No problem.
yeah, the refresh always gives it new life. So yeah, I think the last part of what you said, right? Breakthrough applications are yet to be seen, but I
I lost your audio. So I'm saying some really interesting stuff for sure. You can hear me.
I
Oh,
can.
there you go. There you're back.
Now I'm okay.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. Okay, I don't know what.
Just when I was complimenting the technology, I'm sorry I jinxed it.
That's Murphy's law, right? It's been applicable for ages, right? And it always works when it wants to work. Okay, so let's move on to the second most interesting trend that we spoke about earlier, right? In the beginning of this is the entire flex and remote and the new way of work. And again, old wine and new bottle, but still we'll call it new way of working that we want to call it, right? And that in your perspective, so today we are seeing obviously there's like the them versus us, right? It's still not as evenly distributed as it could have been after COVID, right? I mean, every company in the world had the opportunity to transition, right? And I would love to understand from you, and I'll relate to what we observe in India, and I would love to hear your thoughts from what you see as a macro trend, right? So we saw just out of COVID 2022, when India came out of COVID, you saw a rapid. In fact, much before COVID ended, a lot of companies announced that they're remote, right? They're remote first and all, right? And some of them continued to be that after COVID. At least the real bad part of COVID ended in 2022, early 2022, right? But towards the mid of 2022 and fag end of 2022, a lot of companies got the jitters, right? So they started to kind of roll back their decision and all that, and you still see that happening, right? And 2023, so that's when like we also saw that a lot of companies that the reverse also happened, right? So in the sense, a lot of companies said that right after COVID, we're going to be fully in office, and we're now seeing those companies 1 year later deciding to embrace remote again, right? So there's still a lot of movement happening, confused state of being happening in a lot of with a lot of leaders, right? What do you see? How do you see the macro trend? Do you see a gravitation of a particular type of industry, a particular type of company? Globally, right? Are you seeing trends with respect to being remote first and being embracing flexibility? Or are you seeing like what's the pattern that you're observing?
Right. So I lean a lot on Nick Bloom at Stanford, who publishes the Sway report. He puts out data all the time, but
Yeah,
but kind of the top level is that from his research, about 50% of the people are going to be hybrid or want hybrid. So sometimes in the office, sometimes at home. About 30%, he says, will be want to be office full time, and about 20% remote full time. So about 50% are hybrid. I think hybrid ultimately is the answer because there are reasons to go to an office sometimes. The key is the intentionality about why you go and when you go and what you do when you're there. And I think ultimately talent will win. If the best talent goes to remote or flexible companies over time, the people who aren't are going to either have to change or they're gonna lose in the
right,
market. And so people have called me out using the word talent. I think it is about the best talent because it's the best talent that's going to move the needle. If people don't have options and they can't move, they're not going to move. But I think ultimately flexibility is going to when as the leadership best practices catch up, because then ultimately it's going to be a finance decision as to why are you carrying this expense. I mean, offices are already usually empty 2 days a week. Pretty much Friday's done, even according to like Julie Whalen at CBRE and all the research they've done. People have given up on Friday, and even the return to office mandates, a lot of them return to office 3 days a week, is now considered full time. So I don't think we're going back. It really forces people to be much more efficient in their digital work platforms and communicating how work gets done. What are the protocols? And the big one, I think, is the communication protocols. And all you need to do is get a message from the boss, and you get an email, and then you get an instant message on Gmail, and then you get a text, and then you get a Slack message, and then you get a Jira message, all at the same message, all at the same time, right? That's horrible. It's horrible for bosses. It's horrible for employees. So all these, kind of remote first things to do better communication protocol. What is the priority? When should I expect to return? Because this other kind of overriding concept is and I would say it's digital first, to steal from Darren, or uh, distributed first. And what that means is, so, documentation, it drives your documentation patterns. When you're on a phone call, if there's one remote person, do we all join from our laptop? Do we over index to ask questions first from the people that are remote, not from the people that are in the room? So there's a lot of just behavioral changes that enable it to be much more effective. But ultimately, it's going to be finance. It's going to drive it. And the two things that remote and hybrid really help are retention. Most people, again, back to Nick's research, say remote flexibility is worth 9% of my pay. 9%. That's a big number. And then ultimately, the best talent's going to go where they want to go. And I think 8% in flexibility is going to be hard to give up. This is a group of people that have always grown up with their phones, have always had access to everything they need to know, and can do it when it needs to get done, or
Right.
when is the right time. This arbitrary 8 to 5, um, is kind of random. Now, the one thing that does have to happen is you do need to have what I call mutually agreed to collaboration windows, so that we know that always during this window, this is the time to set meetings, this is the time to set one-on-ones. But again, the other trick is by moving more and more of the drudgery to async, and then hopefully AI will take a lot of the drudgery. The time we spend together is much more quality time in terms of building relationship, communicating mission, understanding your motivations, not task managing stuff that can be more easily done, more efficiently done, digitally.
No, I think well said. And in fact, I think in my opinion, there are two broad decisions, right? The two broad drivers for companies to switch over, right? One is, I think both of them you mentioned. One is talent, right? And every for every like I mean somebody like me, a startup that's growth, and identifying all the levers for growth, that decision trumps every other decision, right? I can make finance justify that. If I need to hire, like, I mean, companies are doing that, right? They're paying top dollars to hire the top talent, right? They're able to justify a different pay scale for the top talent, right? And similarly, the talent, I think, maybe like you said, right, for high growth companies, talent would override the finance decisions, whereas for more mature and more evolved companies, finance will override that, right? And so I think that's the so those two are going to dance in tandem depending on what stage of the company that you are at, right? And again, now I just want to pick up a point that you made earlier on, right? I'm just curious to pick up that point. Is that the amongst the remote companies that exist today, right? The very openly remote companies that exist today, there's a lot of that open source community thinking that's there, right? That's kind of uh, influencing how the ecosystem moves, right? And obviously, it's making things move faster, right? If everybody had to do
Right.
their learn by their own mistakes, it's going to take us forever to move, right? Why and what do you think is the underlying what is in it for me for every company to do that? Because I'm curious to know why would a doist, why would an Atlassian, why would a remote do all of this, to go out of the way to document, to put it out there and all that, right? What is it for them to do that, right? Because in a way, I think um, that's going to define how fast this future is going to come to us.
Right. I think it does a couple things. One, I think it's a talent play for them to say, "Come work here." It's an open kind of publishing of our culture. It's an opening publishing of what we prioritize and how we kind of organize the company. And the other piece that I think is really critical here is marginal effort, especially for a smaller company or high growth company. Are people there and doing the job, or are they there and really digging in and pulling, an extra 20% harder, pulling an extra 30% harder? So if people are happy at work and can be whole in their lives and do things outside of work that help them be happier at work, when they are actually digging into the task at hand, they're going to dig in harder. And I think unlocking marginal effort in people is a huge unlock. There's one interview, Toby Redshaw, he said he thinks it's like it could be 30% difference in terms of the productivity of the people that you have in the building. So I think that's a huge thing, both getting more out of what you have, retaining them for longer, and then also setting up an attractive situation for people that want to come and join the company. I think those are huge. I think what's great about the open source ethos that I love, and I think it's such a cool thing from the software world that can be leveraged more often, is almost more of a marketing play, which is, let me tell you everything I know about something, and then you pay me to apply my expertise to your particular problem. And so that's just kind of an open source go to market method that I think it's great, because you can drive your development so much faster, say like in Linux or, Red Hat, whatever, when you've got an active and engaged community contributing beyond what's inside the proverbial four walls of the building. So I think there's just a huge benefit to open source. I think that the transparency in open source, probably, I don't work for some of these companies, but I'm presuming the transparency is a cultural kind of priority, probably extends into other things beyond just their workplace policies, but in terms of the way they communicate and the way they have one-on-ones and those types of things. So you can't really go wrong with transparency.
Right, right. Well said, Jeff, on that point. That I think it's definitely a talent play as well, right? A lot of these companies are being they're telling not just the entire world, but they're telling their future clients and future employees this is who they are, right? And it's kind of
Right.
an open book, so I think it's kind of attracting the right audience towards them, right? That rather than, and they would probably have to do less of sifting through that. Through that, they already have. It's like qualifying your leads before the leads even come into the funnel, right? You're already
Right. Right.
qualifying your next employee in. So
Such an important part of the culture too. I mean, I had a talk with John Fort, CNBC, and his take on culture was every company should have their own culture, and every culture can be successful as long as it's authentic and it's legit, and there's no BS. Working for Oracle is different than working for Atlassian, but you know what Larry's all about, and you know what Atlassian's all about. You can choose whether that's a culture that you want to participate in, but as long as it's authentic and consistent, I think those are the most important things, and then people can choose whether it's a good fit.
absolutely, absolutely, right. So, and the other part of flex that I want to, I kind of somehow combine this into the flex discussion itself is the future of labor, right? In the sense, uh, now you have fractional everything, right? You have FTEs versus contractors. You've got gig economy. I mean, it's been that was the future of work, right? The flavor of future of work 7 8 years ago, right? And everything would become broken down into gigs and I mean, simple to complex. A task rabbit equivalent of that would kind of take care of everything, right? But you had top talent, you had so many other companies that emerged from that definition of future of work, right? How is that, in your opinion, going to shape the companies of the future, right? And again, this is I'll take another analogy that I one of the leaders used to use in the company that I worked before, right? Uh, 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 they would kind of say that what is in and what is out, right? What is core to me is FTEs, right? What is non-core to me would be contractors, right? So if I'm a bank, I need to have all the banking functions in-source, right? But technology is not. I'm not. Technology doesn't define me as a bank, right? So technology is outsourced, right? So what's in here and what's out there was the way to define how you would, whether you would use contractors or FTEs to get the job done, right? How has that definition changed over time, right? And again, uh, again, countries like India have benefited from that, the currency arbitrage and the cost arbitrage, right? And that difference is fading away quite fast, right? I mean, companies don't have to outsource just to save on costs, and there are different multiple markets available, right? So how do you now see the future of labor? And again, we can probably restrict it to knowledge work, because I mean, the blue collar and everything else could be too complicated to kind of talk about, right? So in the knowledge work realm, how do you see companies making this decision of hiring somebody as an FTE, a remote worker, albeit uh, vis-a-vis sourcing this through fractional talent and fractional or gig work talent?
I think it's gonna get really complicated and dynamic and very different than it is today. I mean, today there's a pretty hard line between a 1099 and a W-2, whether you're inside the house or you're outside the house. I think that's gonna get much more blurry with the rise of the gig economy. There's also a rise. I just did an interview with Phil Simon on 9 tectonic trends that are shaping the future, and one of his was fractional. This kind of idea of fractional CMO or fractional CISO. I don't know how fractional works. I keep trying to figure out what's the difference between fractional and a consultant. Do you get an equity play? I think it's going to become much more dynamic and a lot more varied in the way that different people can contribute the talent to your organization. Um, what's really interesting in the industry, because things are changing so fast, it's not necessarily a figure out the answer and then get really efficient on the production side and really broad on the distribution and sales side, because the whole thing might turn over tomorrow. You might not even, the whole market could just go away. And we're
Mhm.
seeing, the compressing of cycles dramatically, within kind of what's hot and what's not. So I think the new thing to optimize for around as a business is decision making and fast decision making. How can you change quickly? How can you put in a culture that's less worried about milking, the most that we can out of this product line or the service line, and
Right.
more about how do we change quickly when suddenly this is no longer the right thing to do, or it forks and there's another place that we can go. I'm really excited to see how it's going to change. The old contract, which was you work for me for 25 years, I give you benefits and I give you retirement, right? That's gone. And even inside of companies, I interviewed Meg Bear at SAP Success Factors. They're excited about internal talent markets, even treating the people inside the company as employees, as almost like contractors, in terms of bringing them together around dynamic teams, bringing them together around dynamic tasks, and really even treating their day-to-day work world almost more like a contractor in terms of increasing the variability of
Mm.
projects that they're on, changing the projects that they're on, reconstituting teams for new challenges, and really starting to think much more either project based inside the company or outside the company, and then that talent that you can bring to that project specifically, which is probably going to be a blend of inside people and outside people, depending on what you can get. So I think it's going to be much more dynamic and much less of a kind of you're inside or outside.
Right. And again, the one instant interesting correlation that I can see for remote first, flex first, or being remote first, and embracing the new type of talent is that the foundations, the fundamentals of measuring outcome, right? Defining goals, defining KPIs or KRAs or whatever you want to call them, and measuring, because in a fractional work world or a gig economy work world, or even let's say a contractor based work world, right? If you just measure the input, which is the number of hours that you are warming up your seat, it's not going to work, right? So I think the
Right.
first, I think the in a way, trying to be remote first, at least in your thinking, if not in practice, right? In kind of starting to change your processes, documentation, communication that you spoke about, right? All of these become almost the essentials that you need to have to be able to start to embrace this future of talent, right?
Right.
If you
Right.
don't have that, right, how are you going to measure a fractional CMO's outcome, right? How are you going to compensate them for that? How do you even know whether to keep them or to fire them, right? If you're just clocking the number of hours that they put in. So I think those are the roles where the outcome measurement is a lot more easier, a lot more metric driven. Is are the ones that I feel will transition first into that realm, in my opinion. Your take on that?
Yeah, well, the other thing too, you hit on a huge thing is measuring output versus input. And this is kind of back full circle to where we started in terms of the management imperative. Do you know the output that you're trying to get? I mean, do you know what success looks like? And if you're measuring output, not input, then you're less concerned whether people are in the office or not. Are they getting the thing done? And the other thing is, so much more of our output is interrelated to other people's contribution to the output.
Right,
So, trying to measure one person's particular input is way less. Do we get it out or not? And if we didn't, I can't remember. There's an alternative word for postmortem, which takes away this idea of death, which is continuous learning. Blame. It's a blameless postmortem, something like that, where you don't blame, but you are really a learning organization. If anything, that would be the other thing is that, you're a learning organization and you're making decisions and you're working towards objectives and much less about the hourly input or whatever, because more and more of that hourly type of stuff hopefully gets sucked into the AI, right? More and more of the TDM, more and more of the stuff that's not as dynamic and not as strategic, ultimately will go into the AI. But other competitive things are going to be your culture, right? Because it's hard to compete with somebody on culture because that's what they are. You can compete on features, you compete on price, but it's if you've got the spirit culture, which means you keep better people and they're pulling in the oars harder, you're going to win the race.
right, absolutely. And again, that also brings up this irony that I kind of observe is that um, and to Nick's, I follow Nick's data points as well, right? Quite insightful, and I try to correlate that to what's happening back in my country. And again, of all the people that we work with at GoFloater, so we very quickly we help a lot of remote first organizations with their on-demand offices. So their biggest USP for them is the access to talent. Biggest driver for them to be remote first is access to talent, right?
Right.
And that in a country, the second most, we are the already first populous country, I don't know, right? But in a country that's already bringing talent, right? And there's a talent war, right? And that kind of leads me to the last segment of demographics and that you spoke about, the last macro trend of demographics, right? So in a country that's brimming with talent, a lot of probably we beat every any other country with the amount of graduates that we produce year on year, right? And still there's a talent war, right? Because the cream of the talent is still going to be that top 1%, right? And what I see a lot of companies doing is to design everything for the bottom of the pyramid, right? Talent, right? So the it's always the least common denominator, right? Is what the processes are designed for, right? Yeah, I know this one employee who would not open their laptop ever and work, right? So they you design a mouse tracking, click tracking software to see if they're actually using something, right? Okay, that's not effective. They are gaming that, so let me bring them back to the office, right? I have to see them under my eyes. I don't want to believe cameras or technology, right? So when companies start to design their entire thing uh, for the person who's actually not the person who's moving the needle, like you said, right? The top
Right.
talent is what is moving the needle. You create a company that's incentivizing the good talent in a way, right? That's the irony that I see, right? You try to catch the thief and you make the life miserable for somebody who wants to do well. Uh,
Right. It's
that's
funny, the trust. I mean, if if you don't, if your indication of if someone's doing a good job or not is if they're actually moving their mouse around, really to me exposes that you don't really know what you want that person to do.
exactly.
And then the other one that you hear about is people say, well, how do I know if they're being successful or not? It's like, well, are you talking to them? I mean, one of the things that I like to say is digital first or distributed first, not necessarily remote first, because it also takes care of people who are just not coming into the office that day because it forces these communication best practices and these communication protocols. But they're gonna lose the best talent because it doesn't make any sense that when people have options and the best talent will always have options, right?
Yeah.
They will always have options, and the people that don't aren't necessarily the people that you want running, running the show.
Right, absolutely. So last one, I think we're already over the time, Jeff. Sorry for the initial technical glitch that I had.
No
So
problem.
how do you see that changing? I mean, your two take key observations or takeaways on that.
Well, the one is going to be this separation. You talked about the arbitrage in pay between, say, the U.S. and most everywhere else. And I had a really interesting interview with a guy who said, when he hired an engineer from Belarus, the day before he hired the guy, the Belarusians' TAM for getting hired was his local geography. As soon as he took a job online writing code for a US company, suddenly the entire world is his TAM to get a job. So it's almost instantaneously, the supply side of for his opportunity just
Right.
grew so large. So I think it's going to be really interesting to see how pay differential changes from geo to skill, or geo to talent, or geo to output. And that's going to cause some heartburn, I think, for people that had been leveraging, kind of artificial barriers to maintain that spread, which are now all going away. So I think that's going to be really interesting and disruptive.
I mean, even in the same geography, I used to be in the US for some time, right? There used to be something called COLA, right? Cost of living allowance, right?
Right.
It's quite so archaic to now think of it that you are sourcing talent from all over the world, and you're still trying to adjust a Plano, Texas versus Dallas, right? So quite interesting that you have to kind of
Yeah,
keep.
that and it's just so compli I mean, it'll get so complicated. So that's gonna change. I think that's gonna change, pretty significantly.
Right. So I think this is wonderful, right? We covered a lot of ground, right? From AI to demographic changes to flex, and again, the two favorites, technology and flex and remote and distributed first. So we covered a lot of ground, and again, the reason this is specifically right for startups and high growth companies, right? All of these. The future is going to hit them first, right? So it's going to have the impact on them first, and because that's the kind of talent that they would hire, that's the kind of technology that you want to use to differentiate culture, for example, right? Those are going to be differentiators for them to swim in the red ocean or blue ocean, whichever one they're in, right? So a lot of ground, a lot of I think we've peeled a couple of layers of this topic, right? And it is what I come out even more stronger after this conversation is like uh, every time, right? So like there's this proverb that somebody calls this a tiger, right? And three four times it's a prank. The fourth time, when they call it tiger, then you're sleeping, right? You're under your covers, right? But this time around, future of work, it's no longer a prank. It's no longer like the tomorrow that never comes, right? It's already here. It's even more evenly distributed than before, technology wise, talent access wise, and multiple ways, right? So I think that's why it's relevant that we talk about this today, and act on it today, right? Not tomorrow, but start acting on it today itself. So thanks, Jeff. Thanks for spilling in the beans. And the what was even more insightful is that you brought in these views from so many thought leaders that we get to. I mean, I get to follow on LinkedIn, and I get to see their posts. But then hearing what they think, what's in their mind, was so much more gratifying and so much more. Like accelerated my learning curve quite a fast in this just 45 minutes of our discussion.
Well, thank you, Sham. I really enjoyed it, and I could talk about it all day long. So thanks for having me on the show, and I really enjoy following you and looking for some other episodes after this one.
Absolutely, Jeff. Would definitely we'll probably next time around we'll pick up a narrow topic so we can go much deeper into it, and so that could be a good contrast when we do next one with you. So thanks, Jeff, and thanks. And yeah, you woke up relatively early in the morning, so thank you for that. Thanks for accommodating our schedule, and we'll soon want to do another one, a follow up with you on this.
My pleasure, and thanks to the LinkedIn audience for tuning in today.